Ladies and gentlemen, people of all ages, please put your hands together for the Reverend Matt's Monster Science.
Only one way to follow up all of that, jokes about Rampage. How's everyone doing tonight? We have to wait for the screen stuff to happen, you understand? There's some screen stuff. All right, we're good. Can we do something with the lighting so that's more visible? Yes! Excellent. Will we do something with the lighting tonight? Okay. Now I'm not visible, but that's not what's important here. Okay. Very good. All right. I can read. I'm good. Well, that's my show tonight, folks. Thanks very much. Hi, I'm Reverend Matt, and those of you who have seen my work before know that I'm a man of science, that I deal in cold, hard facts. But today, I'd like to begin with a more personal story of the sort my brilliant and physically attractive colleagues here at Die Laughing are so inexplicably fond of. On February 3rd, 2013, my old college friend Ted Spas, one of my top men on the West Coast, posted the following on my Facebook wall. I just awoke from a dream that you had written a book called Ecology of the Video Game Dinosaur. I didn't get to read much of it, but I assume there was a chapter on how nightmarish it is that Yoshi can unhinge his jaw enough to swallow creatures the same size as his own body, and then they disappear as though they never existed. Caps his. Which clearly means that there's a portal to another dimension somewhere in his bowels. Yoshi is not the dinosaur. Yoshi is just the part of the dinosaur our mortal minds can perceive. And that part is the mouth. Anyway, good morning. Those of you who are Facebook friends with me will know that my wall is like this pretty much constantly. So tonight I would like to read for you some excerpts from my book, Ecology of the Video Game Dinosaur, which I wrote in the implicit backstory of a friend of mine's dream. Chapter 1, Yoshi. Now, I have little to add to Mr. Spaz's scholarship, which is, of course, sterling. It must be mentioned, though, that not only does Yoshi consume items his own size, but also expels them abruptly and without seeming harm. I speak, of course, of the eggs. This indicates that the Yoshi we perceive is not only the mouth of the pan-dimensional Hyper-Yoshi, but also its cloaca. Now, this could mean one of two things. It is possible that though the mouth and cloaca are far apart on the obviously colossal entity that is the true incomprehensible Yoshi, that they nevertheless intersect with material reality in more or less the same space and thus can occupy the small area of our reality's Yoshi. Or, alternately, perhaps this entity has a single orifice used for eating, birth, breathing, waste expulsion, sweat. Perhaps it dispenses various beverages. You don't know. Indeed, your pathetic, limited human brain is physically incapable of knowing. And that single orifice looks like an adorable green dinosaur. And it extrudes this orifice into the prime material plane in order to feed, deposit its young, and render assistance to a plumber who is extremely good at jumping. To describe the history of that assistance is, of course, impossible, as Yoshi has appeared in a number of video games too large to be described by conventional mathematics. Another sign of his super quantum grandeur. Super quantum grandeur is, by the way, the name of my signature fragrance as well. Indeed, there are those who say that the world in which Yoshi manifests, Mario's world that is, has become a nonsensical one, with its kart racing, evil plumbers, sentient fungus, and sexy cosplay. They long for a time when things were more grounded, more sensible, when a plumber was scaling a construction site to rescue his girlfriend Pauline from a giant ape named after a small ornery beast of burden which was throwing barrels at him. That was a story we could all relate to. Mr. Spaza's revelation about the nature of the Yoshi entity does cast light on another mystery surrounding it, why there is a character called Yoshi who is a member of a species called Yoshis. Obviously, this is because there are multiple projections of the same entity into our reality, perhaps multiple orifices. They are, of course, different colors, though color changing would be a trivial power for an entity whose natural existence crosses the impossible gulfs of time and space. Indeed, we are left to wonder why it is that Yoshi holds back, why he doesn't simply eradicate Bowser from existence, perhaps retroactively. Perhaps he is testing Mario. Perhaps he has some longer game. It is not for us to question Yoshi. His intellect spans universes of time and space, and we cannot begin to guess at its glorious machinations. This is the conclusion I have reached based originally on his eating things that are too big. Now, I'm not saying we should worship Yoshi. Not yet. I'm occasionally asked whether Bowser is a dinosaur. This question is well-meaning and certainly totally idiotic. Bowser is not a dinosaur. Dinosaurs don't wear white suits. That's science. Somewhere right now, Neil deGrasse Tyson is nodding appreciatively. Thank you. Thank you, Neil. Chapter 2. Things that don't count as video game dinosaurs. Unfortunately, because this book is, unlike Yoshi, finite, certain dinosaurs in video games must be left out. For our own purposes, then, we will discuss only dinosaurs that had their origins in video games. This leaves out countless games. The Turok series is perhaps the most famous, but it is ultimately based on a series of comic books about an indigenous American who fought a lot of dinosaurs. And since native culture is, of course, unconscionably underrepresented in modern storytelling, it is arguably not the best possible solution. But at least there's dinosaurs. The Jurassic Park games are based on the movie series, the one that is degrading at such a rate that if it maintains its downward slope, the 7th film will be technically a war crime. The Dinosaurs for Hire video game is based on a comic book about dinosaurs engaging in modern gig economy capitalism. Disney's Dinosaur was based on a movie that has been entirely erased from the memory and records of humankind. And so on. We must even leave out the various Godzilla games whose creatures originated in cinema, though in the spirit of pure scholarship. I will pause to note that if you were to play me in Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee, and I played Rodan, you would be well advised to prepare for your utter and total degradation. Chapter 22, Bubble Bobble. 1986's Bubble Bobble starred two creatures referred to in the lore as bubble dragons, but as you can see, they are clearly dinosaurs. The proposal that they are dragons is a vile, hateful lie. You have brought dishonor to my video game room in the basement. In this game, you play as one of two brothers, Bubby or Bobby, whose girlfriends have been stolen by Baron von Blubba of the Liechtenstein von Blubbas, whose antisocial tendencies presumably stem from a lifetime of mockery of his name. Von Blubba then transforms the brothers into dinosaurs, which seems like a questionable next move. But then it is what I would do after stealing someone's girlfriend. Then again, it is also what I would do, were I able to, after completing literally any activity. Anyway, now the brothers have to run around the remarkably squarish cave of monsters and blow bubbles and jump over bubbles and have long-term financial planning seminars with bubbles until they finally rescue their girlfriends. One level has what I believe to be an anthropomorphic vestibule, or perhaps a shed. In one of the various alternate endings, you learn that one of the bosses, super drunk, whose attack is throwing bottles at you, is in fact secretly your parents. I am not making that up. Video game designers, give them insurance that covers therapy. There are fully 20 sequels to Bubble Bobble, due, of course, to its shameless pandering to the lucrative bubble dinosaur market, and, of course, because of all the unanswered questions. 2008's Dino Run is a throwback 8-bit style game in which you are a running raptor dinosaur, and the reason you are running is that 6 miles of rock from outer space has impacted with the Earth, and you are attempting to outpace the explosion. When you lose, you are overtaken from behind by an inexorable wall of black smoke. And you know, the heroic tales from which so many video games draw their inspiration always, by their very nature, spit in the eye of death. When the protagonist stands triumphant at the end of the story, or sits triumphant, maybe they're tired, we do not think of decline and cessation, about the nemesis that surely and inevitably comes for us all. And we're not meant to, and that's fine. But when the antagonist is an apocalyptic, planet-killing asteroid and the response is running, I do feel like the happy ending is somewhat unearned. Still, you do get to unlock a variety of jaunty hats. Another thing you get to do is interact with other animals, eating small ones, jumping high enough that a passing pteranodon will grab you and carry you along for a time, like you do, or running straight over the backs of triceratopses and stegosauruses. I find the running across the backs of the stegosauruses to be somewhat disturbing, here seen with the Django Fett hat. There is, in fact, some debate in paleontology as to the purpose of a stegosaurus plates. They may be for display, for heat regulation. Nobody really knows. It is an enduring mystery. But if it were demonstrated that stegosaur ancestors had a big problem with small dinosaurs just running lengthwise over them, then the plates would surely be an adaptation to specifically prevent this. And so in this way, this 8-bit game about running away from Armageddon has failed me. Alas. Alas. Mail-order monsters from 1985 would let you build your own monsters partially out of dinosaur parts, and it taught you the value of building your own monsters partially out of dinosaur parts. And it was fine and beautiful and lovely and pure and good. T-Rex Barkley, pictured here, is, well, I'm just going to read verbatim from the Hoops Barkley Saga Wiki. Shadow Barkley is the embodiment of the negative b-ball energies, as well as Charles Barkley's devious thoughts that were stored within the ultimate b-ball during the events of Space Jam. Acting as the true antagonist of Barkley, Shut Up and Jam, Guy Den. After he became his own separate entity shortly following the Space Jam, Shadow Barkley founded the basketball terrorist organization Blood Moses, making Necron 5 the base of his operations and recruiting former NBA legends like Michael Jordan and even resurrecting Vince Carter to put him into the ranks. He was the culprit behind the Chaos Dunk in Manhattan, with the ultimate goal of creating a new world of Barkley clones so that b-ball could evolve into what Barkley himself saw it could be, believing that the world in its current state was too cowardly and weak to accept the sport's true potential, thereby claiming to be the post-human. He, however, was defeated by Barkley's party, and Necron 5 was destroyed by Barkley with one final Chaos Dunk. Right. Absolutely. I agree. And after you've thought it over for a moment, I think that you will too. Radical Rex is a 1994 game where you play a skateboarding Tyrannosaurus trying to save his girlfriend Rexanne. Shred prehistoric pavement. Prehistoric pavement. That changes everything. It takes hundreds of man-hours to create even the simplest video game, and it is satisfying to know that somewhere in the early 90s, many people went home every day content with a job well done, and happy in the knowledge that they had done something meaningful to make the world a better place. Prehistoric pavement. 2008's Fossil Fighters is basically a Pokemon knockoff with dinosaurs instead of lightning rats, and ducks carrying vegetables. And surely we as a people understand that dinosaurs are better, right? Yes? Yeah. No? No. Follow-up question. What's the point of even having civilization if we can't manage this? I'll answer that myself. In Off-Road Velociraptor Safari, also from 2008, you play a Velociraptor who wears a pith helmet, a monocle, and epaulets, and you drive around in a Jeep doing stunts and hitting other Velociraptors with the spiked ball and chain coming out of the back of your Jeep. And it is the fact that this sort of thing can be created that demonstrates that the world is still worth saving. Not quite as bananas as Off-Road Velociraptor Safari is 1998's Nanosaur, though it is still perhaps a less than entirely... somebody remembers that game. It is still... It is still less than an entirely predictable storyline. Turns out, it's the year 4122, and genetically engineered sapient dinosaurs rule the world after the extinction of humanity. They're beginning to get inbred and stupid, however, and so they dispatch an agent through time to the end of the Cretaceous to collect a variety of different eggs of various species of dinosaur and pterosaur. How exactly this is going to help anything is inadequately explored. But then these aren't humans, their thought processes are different. Perhaps this is their answer for everything. Inbreeding, go back in time and collect dinosaur eggs. Social unrest, go back in time and collect dinosaur eggs. Not enough dipping sauce, go back in time and collect dinosaur eggs. We've all had worse ideas. In 2002's, we have. In 2002's science fiction Zelda game Star Fox Adventures, the action takes place on Dinosaur Planet, which is inhabited by 3 sentient races. The Earthwalkers, who are sentient ceratopsians, the Cloud Runners, intelligent pterosaurs, and the Sharpclaws, who are evil humanoid theropods. Awesome, wonderful, perfect. You have to play as a talking fox. Get me out of here. Now, in those games in which dinosaurs are a little bit more realistically rendered, one very popular sort is the dinosaur hunt game, where you basically run around blowing away dinosaurs because you're on an island with an experiment, or you've gone back in time, or you're on another planet and there are dinosaurs there, and that's probably what's on other planets. Arguably, the biggest of these games, or at least the one with the most sequels, is Dino Crisis, aptly described as Resident Evil with dinosaurs. Other games, unrelated to one another legally, are called, and I am not making this up, Primal Carnage, Primal Prey, The Hunter Primal, and Primeval Hunt, which is like Primal, only has evil in it too, and I am standing on a mountaintop playing a guitar solo. There's the Carnivore series, Jurassic, The Hunted, the list goes on. People really seem to want to shoot at dinosaurs, and why wouldn't they? Dinosaurs have caused us all a lot of trouble. 2018's big dinosaur hunt game is Monster Hunter World, in which you run around killing brilliantly realized dinosaur-adjacent animals and building stuff out of their bodies that lets you fight more powerful dinosaur-adjacent animals. And once they pour this kind of design and world building into a game where you get to be the dinosaur, and then marry that to post-Uncanny Valley virtual reality technology, then I will play it until I starve to death and you can't stop me. It is my destiny. Monster Hunter World also has this. Also quite popular are games that, like Fossil Fighters and Dino Crisis and others we have already discussed, are games that are basically other games, only with dinosaur skins. Zoo Tycoon, the game of running a zoo, which I imagine actual zoo directors looking at and laughing in a hollow and mirthless fashion, sees dinosaur versions of itself in Dino Park Tycoon, Dino Island, and indeed in Zoo Tycoon, Dinosaur Digs. Paraworld is basically Civilization, except there's dinosaurs, which does, in fact, make me want to play it more. The moral is that things are better with gratuitous dinosaurs, and of course we all knew that. We knew it in our bones. It is part of what it means to be human. But it does prompt a question, one that people are always coming up to me and asking me. Reverend Matt, what is the big deal with dinosaurs? Why do they have the appeal that they do? Can it wait? I say. I'm trying to go to the bathroom. But it is a fair question. The appeal among children, I honestly can't explain. I'm no child psychologist, and in fact, I have a theory that tiny babies can speak perfectly well, but they refuse to just to be difficult. But speaking for myself, it goes something like this. First of all, dinosaurs are the fantastic made real, the monsters of myth but not mythical, dragons and basilisks and things that humanity never had it in us to imagine, parrot, rhino, crocodiles, and four-winged lizard crows, and better than that, all of it real, all of it alive and breathing in some gulf of time that we cannot access. And that gulf of time is another reason why I love dinosaurs. They dominated the earth for over twice as long as mammals have. Tyrannosaurus lived closer in time to us than it did to Stegosaurus. And they all went extinct 65 million years ago, and that is a whole lot of years. It would take me like 2 minutes to count all the way to 65 million. It is big. And there's something soothing in that bigness. All of this petty human nonsense, this can't be everything. It can't. We can't be the be-all, end-all of the cosmos because we obviously suck rocks. But dinosaurs, with all of the impossible amount of time that they occupied without once producing Ted Nugent. Not once. Demonstrate that we are not, that there's more to life in the universe than us yelling at each other. And thirdly, dinosaurs, in their variants and their fossilization and their turning into birds and such, are emblematic of evolution, and evolution is terrific. Not only because it's science, and science is terrific, but because evolution has, largely in spite of itself, a vaguely moral implication. Ironically, it was the creationists that made me realize this. You see, if the theory of evolution described everything but humans, if it was only about dinosaurs turning into birds and wolves turning into dogs with nothing about Australopithecus or Neanderthals, we wouldn't have creationism. Evangelicals wouldn't give a dingo's kidney about evolution. What creationists are concerned about is the fact that we are related to animals, which they deeply, passionately don't want to be, which means that there's implicitly something wrong with animals, which is a completely revolting idea. Animals behave according to their natures, and anyway, I'd rather be lowered slowly into a vat of live ticks than spend 1 minute in a room with Laura Ingraham. Animals are gorgeous, and I would love to be connected to them, and evolution teaches us that we are. And it teaches us that the lion is connected to the zebra, and so on. The actual ethical implications are all very complicated, but regardless, everything alive is of a blood, and that is beautiful. Which obviously brings us to the game Dino D-Day. You all saw it coming. From 2011, a World War II game in which you can play as either the Allies or the Nazis, except the Nazis have resurrected dinosaurs for the war effort, and if you want to play a dinosaur, you have to play a Nazi, and it is all very sad-making. Now, admittedly, in 2011, the Nazis were a little funnier than they are now. If modern American Nazis wind up resurrecting dinosaurs and nobody else gets any, then we have to burn literally everything to the ground. Tokyo Jungle, released in 2012, was an open-world sandbox game in which humanity had suddenly disappeared, and Tokyo was now overrun with animals of all kinds, including dogs, cats, wolves, and tigers. I guess I don't know where large numbers of wolves and tigers came from, but then there are also Deinonychuses, which is to say raptors, and Dilophosauruses, so never mind, I guess. You play as an animal, wandering the world and trying to survive, and it has been compared to an all-animal Grand Theft Auto, which sounds great at first, but probably you don't get to throw grenades at ambulances, so what is the point? Here's a baby chick sneaking up on a dinosaur as part of what I hope is a very good plan. Probably. 2017's Ark Survival Evolved is big, sufficiently big that these days, much of the time that I Google some less famous prehistoric animal, the top result is game statistics for its Ark version. I'm not mad, just disappointed. Still, to its credit, it does get into a lot of pretty deep cuts. The teeming throngs of fans of such prehistoric animals as Leedsichthys, Chalicotherium, and Lystrosaurus have at last found their prayers answered. Most of these animals are tameable for one purpose or another, this being presumably the greatest draw of the game. You play a human stranded on an island full of prehistoric and mythical creatures, and you must survive by taming them, and also by building structures, crafting items, and eating. This sort of thing is very popular in video games these days, and perhaps I am merely an old curmudgeon when I say that I kind of miss the ape rolling barrels at me. Still, it does enhance believability, which is certainly what I want from my game about an island full of dinosaurs and griffins. Now, not all video games have had the, shall we say, freewheeling attitude towards real dinosaur paleontology that we have seen thus far. EVO Search for Eden from 1992 was actually a game about evolution, in which you would start as a fish and progress through various actual ages of life on Earth, evolving into animals with the various traits of animals of the time. Beating up other animals would make them leave behind meat, which would give you evolution points. You could spend those points in the body parts of your choosing, advancing through the ages until you were able to join your creator Gaia, pictured here, in Eden. This is all, of course, exceptional science. So it's almost a translation of Darwin, really. I have no idea what's happening here. Evo doesn't so much address evolution as glance at it shyly from across the room and then run into the bedroom crying. But that's still more engagement with science than in most dinosaur video games. Remarkably, the 2017 game Saurian does genuinely strive for legitimate scientific accuracy. In this, you play as one of 6 dinosaur species found in the Hell Creek Formation, a series of real fossil beds in the American West dating from 66 million years ago. You can be a Triceratops, an Ankylosaur, a Dakotaraptor, an Anzu, a Pachycephalosaurus, or a Tyrannosaurus. And this, unfortunately, is where things get dicey, science-wise. You see, when this game was being developed, it was widely held that Tyrannosaurus was a feathery animal, based on the solid and demonstrable fact that many of its close relatives were. Very recently, however, it has been demonstrated that there exist skin impressions from various parts of Tyrannosaurus's body, showing that it was at least largely scaly. And so Saurian's depiction of Tyrannosaurus is very recently outmoded. A bit of a shame, because no other game, indeed no other movie or comic book or anything, has tried so hard to get it right and done so well. But such is the nature of science. It corrects itself, that is its strength. Of course, an increasing number of Americans are against science these days, and since I'm sure none of them would be hypocrites, I do hope they enjoy their never ever driving cars or going to the doctor. As for Saurian's actual gameplay, basically you run around being a dinosaur and doing dinosaur things. Eating, not being eaten again, and so forth. Not to everybody's liking, that is just fine, though if we were to have a debate about the relative merits of pretending to be a dinosaur and the enormous preponderance of video games about pretending to be a mass murderer of some variety, which I also enjoy very much, I do feel that the counterpoint would consist effectively of pushing the kid with glasses into their locker. Now, thus far we have proceeded simply from the cartoonish to the realistic with little particular order therein, but we shall conclude with the 2 finest of the dinosaur video games, albeit in no particular order between the 2. Each is too beautiful, too glorious, too perfect to relinquish the top spot. It would be like choosing between your own children, except neither one is taller, so you can't. Chapter 755, Rampage. A game in which you play a human who has been mutated into a giant monster, and your objective is to destroy the city by climbing up buildings and punching them repeatedly. Also, you can punch cop cars, and you may do this as one of 3 monsters. George, is a giant ape, and an obvious callback to King Kong, the character who made the entire giant city-attacking monster genre possible, and then went on to die for our sins. In the backstory, George was a human scientist mutated into a gorilla by experimental vitamins. In later games in the series, this would be retconned into mutation in a lab explosion, and then into a mutation via drinking scum soda, which seems poorly marketed, but I don't want to tell video game cola salesmen how to do their jobs. These origins are important to gameplay at such times as never. Lizzie is, of course, a giant dinosaur, a Godzilla-type creature, though unlike most city-wrecking reptiles, she is only 3 or 4 stories tall and must climb buildings to destroy them. Indeed, the monsters in Rampage occupy a gray area, a liminal space, if you will. And if you won't, get your head right. Between Kong and Godzilla, they climb buildings like the ape, and they also destroy them like the dinosaur. It is possible that you have never given this sort of thought to Rampage, but that is all right. There is still time to turn your life around. The third monster is Ralph, who rounds out the iconic giant monster trio of Kong and Godzilla with a Wolfman. Now, it may sound as though that makes little sense, and the reason for that is that it completely doesn't. Not for a second. Seemingly, they were able to think of 2 iconic giant monsters and simply unable to come up with a third. And that is why I started Reverend Matt's Monster Science. So that no child ever again has to go to bed only able to think of 2 giant movie monsters. Pterodactyl, giant human, any kind of insect, weird penguin. There is, in fact, a list of some length. It occurred to me as I typed this that perhaps George brought the skyscraper scaling, Lizzie brought the urban renewal, and Ralph brought the human transformation theme, and here we learn about overthinking things to the point of going bananas insane. Rampage spawned a sequel, Rampage World Tour, which differed from the original in that, rather than destroying a nameless generic city, you now destroyed specifically named generic cities. The deep and gripping plot somehow managed to develop even further in the third installment, Rampage Universal Tour, which introduced 2 new elements. You could now destroy space alien cities, and there were 4 new monsters. There was Mucus, an alien monster, which is certainly A-OK. Ruby, a lobster monster who did have precedent in the Godzilla antagonist Ebirah, pictured here. Worth noting is that in Japanese, ebi means shrimp, meaning that this monster's name is effectively Shrimp Raw, and cope with that however you must. Also worth noting is that both Ebirah and this game's Ruby are red in color, implying, of course, that they are cooked. And presumably delicious. Finally, you could play Boris, a giant rhino monster, and Curtis, a giant rat monster, and I do not even understand what is happening. Then there's Rampage Through Time, which brought in time travel and a sophisticated and nuanced discussion of the themes of responsibility and determinism that all of the best time travel stories address. Ha ha, no. It also brought in Harley, a giant warthog man, and okay, fine, whatever. In amidst these, there was Rampage Puzzle Attack, a vaguely Tetris-like game that earned its Rampage association by having you pick a monster at the beginning who would then hang on the side of the game and watch you play it. Which is, I will admit, something that I'd like to see in regular Tetris, but difficult to justify as a sensible video game purchase. It's not the weirdest Tetris variant I've ever seen. I once had a version of the original that would constantly play a kind of soft, groovy, sexy island vacation music. And every time you would clear any rows, a woman's voice would whisper how many. Single, triple, and so on. This Tetris was trying to seduce me, and it made me feel uncomfortable and question things about myself. But I digress. The final game in the Rampage franchise was Rampage Total Destruction, which brought like 1 million new monsters. Mostly they were just increasingly absurd variants on the franchise's insistence on animals. An echidna monster, a poodle monster. But others, Oh, others. Somebody apparently sent them a gently written note carefully explaining that there were more than 2 giant monster movies, and off they went. There was a turtle, presumably a friend to all children, a spider, a one-horned cyclops like in the 7th voyage of Sinbad. This game won the Nobel Prize for video games, which I invented and bestowed upon it in a small private ritual. One of the most remarkable things about Rampage is that in 1986, it brought an unusual level of nihilism back to video games and the giant monster genre in general. Certainly, one would always go out and see a kaiju film hoping to see some of our lovely cities get put into their place. But the narratives of the films could never sign off on this overtly. The city destruction was always bad. Its cessation was always important to the happy ending. And even the most violent video games of the time were ostensibly about defense, the destruction of evil, that is, when they weren't about a frog crossing a street. People made a lot of money off of the frog crossing the street. Eat them Tide Pods up, millennials. My generation has no right to criticize. Anyway, Rampage would have none of this. You were wrecking the city because the city wasn't wrecking itself. Innocent humans would try to stop you, and those innocent humans could cram it. It was unrestrained id and juvenile aggression, and as such, it really had an understanding of the sympathy and allure of monsters that you rarely see expressed with such purity. Even such famously sympathetic monsters as Karloff's Frankenstein or the original Kong are painted as being innocent or in love to earn your sympathy. Not so with Rampage. Let's wreck some stuff. The story of Rampage is not over, and I am concerned that this unique aspect of it is about to be lost. I speak, of course, of the upcoming Rampage feature film, starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, a remarkably charismatic and intelligent actor, and also the inventor of the people's elbow. Can you smell what he is cooking? Presumably not from here. And already much has been changed. The monsters are all gigantified animals, apparently by space alien stuff, and Lizzie is apparently a crocodilian, which is all fine. Actually, I would really, really prefer for Lizzie to be a dinosaur, but fine, whatever. But the presence of The Rock and the fact that Hollywood is putting a lot of money into it indicates that we will be meant to care about humans and their big, dumb, stupid buildings. And this, alas, is not what Rampage is all about. Will it be a heartbreaking story, as moving and emotional as, say, The Shape of Water? No. Will it be good, cheap fun? Also no. Well, maybe. It does look to have a colossal wolf with patagia between its legs that allow it to glide like a flying squirrel, and I cannot think of one movie that wouldn't benefit from that. I will certainly see it, but then I have certain responsibilities to the community. Should you? I cannot make that decision for you. I can only teach you about Rampage as my ancestors taught me, so that you may decide for yourself. Chapter 756, Primal Rage. That's primal rage, by the way, rather than sophisticated rage or urbane rage. Primal Rage was a game that was released in 1994 by Atari Games of the two-dimensional one-on-one fighting variety, similar to Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. Indeed, it actually skewed pretty close to the latter. Like Mortal Kombat, its characters were not pure computer graphic art, but rather digitized captures of photos of real things, actors in Mortal Kombat's case, and models in Primal Rage's case. Also, the character roster itself was something of a satire of Mortal Kombat's, or perhaps homage would be a better word. Mortal Kombat is sort of beyond satire. Satire exists to take something and make it absurd, whereas Mortal Kombat already spells combat with a K and stars an ice ninja. And even so, in later editions, Mortal Kombat would satirize itself, or rather its detractors. In response to the outcry about its over-the-top graphic violence, its sequels would have finishing moves such as Friendship, in which you would give your opponent a lovely gift, which was presumably psychological warfare, given you just beaten them into oblivion. And the Babality, in which you transformed your opponent into a tiny infant via your mastery of the martial arts. That's second Dan black belt at best. Primal Rage didn't have any of this. What it did have was dinosaurs and giant apes and stuff like that. And according to some, each individual character corresponded to a character from the original Mortal Kombat. So let's look at that case by case. First off, there's your Blizzard, a Yeti who is sort of the protagonist of the game, because what's more sympathetic than an abominable snowman? Here he is in his story screen, Blizzard's Solitude, though as you can see, he is not alone, but rather being worshipped and having his toes gently stroked by several scantily clad humans who are presumably dying of frostbite. These come from one of the conceits of the game, which is that each monster is served by primitive humans called pagans. When you meet someone in real life who identifies as pagan and you ask them which giant fighting dinosaur they worship, you may find that they become cross with you. Especially if, like myself, you are extremely insistent about it. This is because they know that you know their secret. Anyway, Blizzard obviously corresponds to Sub-Zero, so there we are. Next up, there's Talon, a dinosaur of the dromaeosaur or raptor variety. He has a tuft of feathers on his head, which is actually remarkably good in forward-thinking paleontology for a game that, I am sorry to report, occasionally is scientifically inaccurate. Here's Talon's story screen, which I think you'll agree is distressingly sexy. His play is heavy on the kicks, which is said to correspond to Mortal Kombat's Liu Kang. Rounding out the ranks of the virtuous monsters is Armadon, the single non-predatory dinosaur, who makes up for it by being every non-predatory dinosaur at once. He's got a ceratopsian's head, ankylosaur armor, stegosaur spikes, the works. He's also got lightning powers and a head that looks maybe like a giant hat, so he is thought to correspond to Raiden. Here he is meditating, because that's what you were hoping for in your fighting dinosaur game. Then we have Sauron, Lord of Mordor, or rather, Sauron Yellow Tyrannosaurus. He has moves that produce shadows like those of Johnny Cage, and he has enemies with Diablo, an evil red tyrannosaur who breathes fire like Scorpion. Their enmity is, of course, a symbolic microcosm of the eternal war between yellow and red. There's Vertigo, a sort of made-up cobra dinosaur thing, who is said to be an evil sorceress from the moon. Obviously. I mean, look at her. That is plainly an evil sorceress from the moon. Vertigo corresponds to Sonya because she and Sonya are both uniquely girls. Finally, there's Chaos, who supposedly corresponds to Kano because they both have a cannonball move, but really that's not the takeaway you should get from Chaos. In 1994, video games were embattled more so than they are now. In particular, there were a lot of accusations that they were turning children violent, which, in fairness, does explain why most of the people in this room are murderers. And certainly any discussion of the medium as an art form was in its infancy. They were regarded as low culture when they were regarded as culture at all. As if in answer to this, Primal Rage gave us Chaos, a character whose special moves largely revolved around vomiting and farting. He even had a finishing move called the Golden Shower. Thank you, Primal Rage. Thank you. In spite of this, and in spite of being a video game about fighting dinosaurs, a planned sequel never saw the light of day, though prior to its cancellation, the first game had spawned a line of toys, a short comic book series, and of course, a board game, and my birthday is coming up, you guys. In this proposed sequel, the meteor that had transformed our planet into the world of Primal Rage, because Primal Rage is set in the future, it's a chilling vision of things to come when the Earth has been renamed, check this out, Earth. The meteor hatches, and out comes a friggin' zombie dragon called Necrosan, who did get a toy pictured here. And so the various monsters have to put aside their differences and team up against a greater threat. Well, obviously a story this profound and compelling could not go untold, and so when the sequel was canceled, they instead gave us this, Primal Rage, The Avatars by Mr. John Vornholt. A novel. Literature. It's pretty much garden variety drivel, of course, but it is notable for two things. Each of the monsters in this book has a sort of high priest called an avatar, because what we all wanted from this franchise was more humans. Most of these avatars are either good or evil and have exactly 0 character traits beyond this. The single exception is Vertigo's avatar, Melissa, pictured here in a preview from the comic book series. And if this picture wasn't lightboxed from actual porn, then I don't know anything about how nerds' minds work. And indeed, Melissa's character trait beyond her alignment rating is that she is an over-the-top nymphomaniac. Our man Vornold pours this on with a manic glee that's almost impressive. Melissa is incapable of the simplest of actions without being a ludicrous seductress about it. She delivers one line with a seductive shrug, another with a flirtatious bow. I do not know what these things would look like, but we will be having a contest to recreate them at the end of the show. The second remarkable thing about this book is a question of capitalism. Now, I got my copy of it a few years ago at Uncle Hugo's science fiction bookstore over on Chicago for the sum of $3. If you would like a copy of it, there is, of course, the online secondary market, which I checked the other day, and it looked like this. $117 new, $35 used. And copies of this book are presumably a little thin on the ground at this point. But there are fully 23 sellers on Amazon alone, and more to the point, apart from supply, there's also an economic concept called demand. And I love Primal Rage. Many fine people love Primal Rage, but I am sadly persuaded that we do not live in a world in which people are really going to pay top dollar for a terribly written used paperback about a dinosaur video game from 1994. So how does this work? Well, I am a man of science, but there are things that science does not explain. Thank you. We should get the next group up, and if there are any, I could take a question or two if there are any questions, since this was promised. I could also just tear this place apart. Anything? Anyone? All right. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. No, they have extremely not special kidneys, hence the not carrying a pair of dingo's kidneys, they are worthless. Yes, exactly, yeah.
How many times are you going to have to see Primal Rage?
You mean Rampage? Here's a mistake that I make sometimes. When Jurassic World came out, I made 4 different dates to go and see it with different people. And then I saw it 4 times. Then I saw Jurassic World 4 times. Never again. I'll see it once. If I like it, I will see it additional times. All right. Another one? What's that?
What's your thoughts on Land Before Time?
Land Before Time is a series of cartoon movies with talking dinosaurs in it. This concludes my thoughts on The Land Before Time. All right, thank you so much. I've got a lot of shows coming up in the next couple of months. Check out RevMattsMonsterScience.com. Find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I have a show next Monday at the Shoreview Library, a Minnesota Best Area History of the Monsters native to Minnesota. It'll be great. Thank you again.
The Reverend Matt. All right, thank you, Matt. Well done, sir. I got an elbow in the hand. That was, that's the kind of nerd cool we practice here at Fearless.